if we did nothing about it, either in Europe or in the rest of the world, the global numbers would rise to the top of the projected range from the UN, which is by 2050, that's only 34 years' time, that's 10.9 billion people. And the range that they project for that period, for 2050, is a range of 2.5 billion, because if we really work at it, we could get quite near the lower end of the range at 8.3 billion. Range of 2.5 billion people, which was the entire population of the planet when I was 10. It's tripled in my lifetime, the population, and people of my age. And anyone who pretended that it was just as easy to supply food and water and energy and deal with the wastes of 2.5 billion more or fewer, as though there was no real difference, is clearly delusionary. This is seriously ridiculous proposition, and yet it seems to be an underlying assumption in all those reports put out at national level, European level, UN level, globally, who don't mention population as a problem, as a factor, multiplying all the other problems that we're going to face in the next 30 years. It was recognized through the 80s, but during that time a backlash was developing against the Malthusian view, comprising a sort of bizarre coalition, as I see it, of three elements. First of all, certain feminists who quite understandably and rightly objected to men instrumentalizing women's bodies for public purposes. Secondly, the religious right, led for obvious reasons by the Pope, because the Catholic Church has a monstrous doctrine on contraception, and I pray that this excellent new Pope is going to change that. And the third was the liberal left, who somehow got it in their mind that the conversation about population only referred to developing countries. That's where the problem was, that's where the rapid growth was, the high fertility, and so to talk about it at all involved old, rich, white men like me blaming young, poor black women for having too many babies, blaming their poverty on them, blaming the problems of the planet. I don't know where this came from, but it's clearly silly, because I'm desperately anxious to help all those young, poor black women out there take control of their own fertility and thereby take control of their own lives. I want to empower women. That's the essential part of the solutions that we're going to look at. The other one, of course, being to make available both the services and the information and the education to handle family planning. It will be extremely difficult to feed 8.1 billion people in a sustainable way. It will be infinitely more, well, vastly more difficult to feed 10.9. Another reason to stabilize our numbers as quickly as possible by acceptable voluntary means which respect human rights, of course. Although in Rwanda they can feed, maybe 2 people with a hectare can feed 4 children and even 6 grandchildren, they certainly can't feed 16 grandchildren. It depends how much land you've got, and family planning is just as important for them as for anybody else, possibly more so. In the field of water security, that's probably as great a problem for 4 billion people in the world as energy security, because the aquifers are running dry, the rivers are under stress, there are tensions growing internationally in some of the big catchments which are shared. The Nile, of course, the Euphrates, the Mekong, the Brahmaputra. They have treaties around these, there are treaty provisions, but when push comes to shove, a treaty is a piece of paper. The Ethiopians, I believe, are pretty confident that having a high rainfall, they can sell that water dear to their neighbors downstream down the Nile, but not by chance, I suspect. Some leak from an Egyptian military source in Cairo a few months ago did suggest that if they completed the biggest of the dams they're planning on the Blue Nile, the Egyptian forces might feel obliged to blow it up. Now, this is fighting talk, and it's only a rumor, and so what? But the fact is that when populations are growing the whole time, the more water the upcatchment people retain for their growing populations, the less there is for the rapidly growing populations downstream, particularly in Cairo or in Egypt, where the population is growing very fast, a major driver of the Arab Spring there, as across much of the Arab world. Rapid population growth, very large numbers of unemployed young men who feel angry.